The Galactic Council had ruled the stars for millennia, a vast coalition of thousands of species bound together by strict laws and a rigid hierarchy. Every race was expected to obey, to conform, and to know its place within the grand design of the universe. But then came humanity, a species that did none of these things. They expanded rapidly, not through conquest, but through sheer audacity. Their technology advanced at an alarming rate, their fleets grew stronger with each passing year, and worst of all, they refused to submit to the Council's authority. The Council had tried diplomacy, threats, and even economic sanctions, but nothing worked. Humans did as they pleased, laughing in the face of power. And so, in a desperate attempt to reassert control, the Galactic Council made a decision that would change history. They declared war on humanity. The decision was made in the grand chambers of the Galactic Council, where leaders of thousands of species sat in their towering seats, their voices raised in frustration. The Supreme Chancellor of the Council, an ancient reptilian being with shimmering golden scales, slammed his clawed hand on the table, his voice echoing through the chamber. Humanity is a disease that must be cured. They disrupt our economy, mock our traditions, and ignore our authority. We have been patient for too long. If they will not bow, then they will be crushed. A wave of agreement spread across the hall, alien voices hissing, clicking, and growling in unison. The decision was unanimous. A formal declaration of war was transmitted across the galaxy, and the Council's armada, one of the largest fleets ever assembled, was mobilized to strike at the heart of human-controlled space. The Council believed this war would be swift, decisive, and final. Humanity, after all, was small compared to the vast empires that had fallen in line before them. The war was supposed to be over before it even began. But when the declaration reached Earth, something unexpected happened. Humanity didn't react with fear. They didn't beg for peace or scramble to assemble their defenses. Instead, they laughed. News broadcasts covered the announcement like it was entertainment. Memes flooded the galactic network, mocking the Council's decision. Human comedians made jokes about how the Council had just signed its own defeat, and analysts on human media spoke with amusement rather than concern. Even Earth's military officials, when asked about their strategy, responded with cryptic smiles and vague remarks like, "Let them come. It'll be fun." To the rest of the galaxy, this reaction was baffling. How could a species react with humor to the threat of complete annihilation? The Council's admirals ignored the strange response and launched their first offensive. The initial attacks targeted human colonies on the Outer Rim, strategically chosen for their lack of heavy defenses. The goal was to take out key outposts quickly and force the humans into surrendering before they could retaliate. Massive dreadnoughts, each the size of a small moon, descended upon human territories, firing energy weapons capable of reducing entire planets to rubble. The first human settlements fell almost effortlessly. Reports flooded in that the Council's fleets had secured multiple systems with little resistance. The Council's leaders celebrated, convinced that humanity had finally realized its mistake. But then, things started to go wrong. Entire fleets stopped responding to transmissions. Ships vanished from sensors without a trace. Planets that had been conquered suddenly appeared back under human control, as if the invasion had never happened. Some Council officers reported encountering strange phenomena: ships locking up, weapons refusing to fire, and even battlecruisers suddenly losing all power mid-flight. Every attempt to analyze these anomalies led to more confusion. There were no traces of human warships, no counterattacks, no known weapons being used against them. It was as if humanity was toying with them. And then, when transmissions were finally re-established with one of the lost fleets, the messages they received were not distress signals or battle reports. They were human jokes, laughter, and music. The Council had declared war, but humanity treated it like a game. Panic began to spread among the ranks of the Council's military leaders. How was this possible? Had they underestimated human technology? Had they walked into a trap? No one knew the answers, but one thing was becoming clear: this war was not going to be as easy as they had believed. Humanity was not afraid. And that terrified the Galactic Council more than anything. The Galactic Council had expected a war of dominance, a battle where their overwhelming numbers and firepower would crush humanity before it had a chance to resist. The first phase of their assault had been carefully planned swift and brutal strikes against human colonies, designed to break their morale and force an immediate surrender. On paper, it was a flawless strategy. The Council had deployed its finest war fleets, thousands of heavily armed dreadnoughts, cruisers, and destroyers moving in perfect synchronization. The first wave of attacks hit smaller human settlements, wiping out communications and military installations with ease. The Council's commanders watched from their command centers, confident that the war was as good as won. But something was wrong. It wasn't the expected resistance or counterattacks; those never came. Instead, something far more unsettling was happening. The Council's fleets, so powerful and unstoppable, were starting to disappear. At first, the reports were vague: ships vanishing from long-range scanners, entire battalions going silent with no warning. Some admirals believed it was a communication issue, a simple failure in their systems. But then the footage arrived. It was blurry, distorted as if something had tampered with the recordings, but the images were enough to send a chill through every alien officer who watched. Massive warships, each capable of glassing an entire planet, simply ceasing to exist. No explosions, no enemy fire, just nothing. One moment, they were there, and the next, they were gone, like they had been erased from reality itself. Panic began to spread through the Council's forces. Even the most battle-hardened generals, who had seen countless wars across the centuries, had never encountered anything like this. What kind of technology could make entire fleets vanish without a trace? No one knew the answer, and that was the most terrifying part. As more fleets advanced deeper into human space, the strange occurrences only increased. Weapons refused to fire, targeting systems became unreliable, and ships started to lose power at random intervals. Some captains reported hearing strange noises within their ships, human laughter echoing through the halls despite no humans being present. Others claimed to see ghostly figures walking through their decks, only for them to vanish when approached. Some officers dismissed it as psychological warfare, tricks played by human intelligence operatives, but that didn't explain why their ships were failing. It didn't explain why battleships that had been fully operational just moments before would suddenly go dark and drift lifelessly in space, their crews missing as if they had never existed. Desperate to regain control, the Council ordered a full-scale planetary assault on a major human world, Nova Prime. This was one of humanity's largest colonies, a key military hub, and the perfect place to crush their resistance. The Council's forces approached with caution, their dreadnoughts positioned in tight formations, their fighters swarming ahead like a living shield. They scanned for any sign of human defenses, expecting planetary shields, missile platforms, and fleets ready for battle. But there was nothing. Nova Prime stood silent, its cities still lit, its surface undisturbed. It was as if the humans didn't even care that an invasion was coming. The alien commanders hesitated. Was this a trap? Was this some kind of trick? But their orders were clear: attack, occupy, and dominate. The first wave of dropships descended into the planet's atmosphere, carrying thousands of elite soldiers, each one trained for planetary warfare. They landed in the capital city, spreading out cautiously, weapons raised. The streets were empty. No military presence, no civilians running in fear, just silence. It was unnatural, unnerving. As the troops moved through the city, scanning every building, they noticed something even stranger. There were signs of life: fresh food on tables, warm drinks still steaming in cups, doors left open as if people had simply walked away. It was as if the entire population had vanished in an instant. The soldiers felt uneasy, their grips tightening on their weapons. The only sound in the city was the hum of their own equipment, the occasional flicker of a streetlight. And then, without warning, the nightmare began. The ships in orbit lost contact with their ground forces. One by one, their transmissions were cut off, their last messages filled with confusion and horror. "We are not alone," one captain had whispered before his signal was lost. Seconds later, the warships above Nova Prime started malfunctioning. Engines shut down, gravity stabilizers flickered, and entire fleets found themselves drifting helplessly. Alarms blared through every dreadnought, but no amount of button pressing or emergency protocols could fix what was happening. And then, on every screen, every communication device, came a single message broadcasted in perfect clarity across the entire invasion force. "Why are you here?" The voice was human, calm, almost amused. It wasn't a warning. It wasn't a threat. It was a question, spoken as if the Council's war, this grand declaration of superiority, was nothing more than an inconvenience, something humanity found mildly irritating rather than terrifying. The alien commanders tried to respond, demanding to know who was speaking, demanding to know what was happening to their forces, but there was no reply. Instead, the silence stretched on, suffocating, crushing. And then, the Council's warships began to vanish, one by one. No explosions, no traces left behind, just nothingness. The remaining fleet commanders, paralyzed by fear, had no choice but to retreat. The battle for Nova Prime had lasted less than an hour. Humanity hadn't fired a single shot. Asa, the broken remnants of the Council's fleet, limped back to friendly space. Word spread like wildfire. This wasn't a war. This was something else entirely. Humanity wasn't reacting like a species fighting for survival. They weren't scrambling to defend themselves or pleading for mercy. They were watching, waiting, and laughing. The question echoed in every commander's mind: if humans weren't taking this war seriously, then what were they really capable of? The Council had started a war they no longer understood, and for the first time, they realized they might not survive it. The Galactic Council had never known fear like this before. Their war fleets, once thought invincible, had been reduced to nothing more than scattered wrecks and vanished ships. Their soldiers had landed on human worlds, only to disappear without a trace. Their weapons had failed, their technology had been rendered useless. And worst of all, humanity had not even retaliated. No counterattacks, no desperate last stands, no visible effort to defend themselves. It was as if humanity saw this entire war as a joke, a minor inconvenience barely worth their attention. And that was what terrified the Council the most. If humanity wasn't taking this war seriously, then what would happen when they did? Panic spread through the Council's highest ranks. Emergency meetings were held, their grand chambers now filled with anxious voices instead of arrogant declarations of power. The Supreme Chancellor, his golden scales dull with stress, slammed his clawed fist against the table. "We must retaliate. We cannot let them humiliate us like this. If we do nothing, the rest of the galaxy will see us as weak." His words sparked a wave of uneasy agreement, but deep down, every leader present knew the truth: this war had already spiraled out of their control. And yet, they had no choice. They had started this war, and now they had to see it through. A new strategy was devised. The Council's remaining fleets were to regroup, reinforced by the most advanced warships in their armada. They would strike at multiple human-controlled systems at once, overwhelming any possible defenses with sheer numbers. This time, they would not hold back. Civilian casualties were no longer a concern. Every human world they reached would be reduced to ash. This was no longer about control. It was about survival. If humanity wasn't afraid of them, then they would make them afraid. The war fleets launched once more, thousands of ships tearing through hyperspace toward human territory. The first target was Sigma 9, a heavily populated human colony with industrial hubs and military installations. As the fleet emerged from hyperspace, their weapons were primed, their targeting systems locked onto key locations. This time, they would not hesitate. But something was wrong. The system was empty. No human warships, no planetary defenses, not even a single civilian vessel. It was as if the entire colony had been abandoned overnight. Confused, the fleet's admirals ordered their ships to advance cautiously, scanning for any signs of human presence. Then, without warning, the nightmare began. The moment the first Council ship crossed into orbit, power shut down, weapons refused to fire, and the ships lost control of their navigation. Panic spread as warships drifted helplessly, their crews trapped inside like prisoners. And then, one by one, the ships started to vanish. No explosions, no enemy fire, just an eerie silence before entire battlecruisers simply ceased to exist. The surviving ships tried to retreat, but hyperspace drives refused to activate. They were trapped. And that was when the transmissions began. Across every monitor, every communication device, came the same message, soft, calm, and terrifying in its simplicity. You wanted war. Now you have it. The screens flickered, showing images that made every alien officer's blood run cold. Footage from inside their own ships, security recordings showing their own crew members but twisted. Soldiers were seen screaming in terror, clawing at their own faces, their bodies distorting before they, too, vanished into nothingness. Others stood frozen, staring blankly into the air as if they had seen something beyond comprehension. And then, the final image of view from outside their fleet, taken from an unknown source. It showed their warships, trapped in space, surrounded by something invisible, something vast. And then, in an instant, the entire fleet was gone. Back at the Council's central command, silence filled the war room. The highest-ranking officials, those who had ordered this war, now sat motionless, their faces drained of color. The transmission had been sent directly to them, a warning they could no longer ignore. Sigma-9 was gone. The fleet had been wiped from existence. And still, humanity had not fired a single shot. The truth was undeniable now. The Council had made a mistake. They had picked a fight with something beyond their understanding, something they could not defeat. Humanity had held back for too long. But now, the time for games was over. The counterattack was coming not as a fleet of warships, not as an army of soldiers, but as something far worse. And when it arrived, the Council would finally understand what true fear felt like. The Galactic Council was crumbling under the weight of its own fear. Entire fleets had been wiped from existence, not by weapons or enemy fire, but by something far worse, something unseen, something unstoppable. The most advanced warships in the galaxy had vanished without a single explosion. Whole armies had disappeared as if they had never existed. The Council had waged war on humanity, believing them to be a primitive race, an easy conquest. But now, as they stared at the empty void where their once mighty fleets had been, they realized the terrible truth: humanity was not fighting back because they did not need to. The Council's central command was in chaos. Grand Chancellor Orcs, once proud and confident, now sat in silence, his reptilian fingers twitching as he watched the latest reports. Sigma-9 was gone. The fleet sent to destroy it had simply ceased to exist. No wreckage, no distress signals, no survivors. Just nothing. The admirals and strategists surrounding him whispered frantically, trying to make sense of the situation. Some believed it was a new human weapon, a technology beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen. Others were convinced it was something worse, something unnatural. Then came the message. Across every council world, on every screen, every communicator, the same words appeared. There was no grand speech, no threats, no warnings. Just a single sentence. We were never what you thought we were. The meaning was unclear at first, but the implications sent waves of terror through every council species. What did humanity mean? Were they not organic beings like the rest of the galaxy? Did they hide their true nature? The question rippled through every level of leadership, through every military outpost, through every fleet still intact. And then, the history archives were opened. The Council had studied humanity for centuries, monitoring their progress, tracking their wars, analyzing their advancements. But no one had ever truly questioned why humanity advanced so quickly, why they adapted faster than any species, why they survived events that should have wiped them out. The records showed a pattern too terrifying to ignore. Humanity had always been different. Unlike other species, they did not just evolve, they defied nature itself. Their survival was not based on strength, not on numbers, not even on superior technology. They survived because the universe itself seemed to bend around them. Catastrophic disasters that should have ended them instead made them stronger. Wars that should have destroyed them only pushed them to new heights. Diseases, famine, even nuclear devastation, nothing stopped them. And then, the missing records were found. Documents hidden deep within the oldest council archives, buried for millennia, sealed away as if someone had tried to erase them. They were written in an ancient language, predating the council itself, but when translated, the words sent chills through the highest ranks of the government. They are not bound by the laws of existence as we are. The text spoke of an old race, one that had existed long before the council, long before any known civilization. A race that was never meant to be. The universe had tried to correct itself, had tried to erase them time and time again, but they always returned, stronger than before. They were an anomaly, a mistake in the fabric of reality. They were impossible. The text referred to them by a name that had no direct translation, but the closest meaning in modern language was clear. The Unseen Ones. Humanity. The council's leaders sat in stunned silence. They had declared war on something that should not exist, something that defied all logic, all natural law. Humanity was not a species. They were something else entirely, something that had been hiding in plain sight, pretending to be ordinary, pretending to be weak. And now, the illusion was gone. Then, without warning, the lights flickered. The screens across the council's chambers turned to static. Every piece of technology in the room, no matter how advanced, failed in an instant. The air grew thick, heavy with something unseen, something watching. The council members looked around in panic, their breaths shallow, their hearts pounding. And then, the laughter returned. It was not a human voice, not entirely. It was distorted, layered, something far beyond comprehension. It echoed through every chamber, every warship, every city under council control. It was everywhere, yet nowhere. A presence they could not fight, could not reason with. And in that moment, they knew. The counterattack had already begun. Not with fleets, not with weapons, not with destruction, but with the truth. And the truth was the most terrifying weapon of all. The Galactic Council had never known true terror until now. Their fleets had been erased, their soldiers had disappeared, and their greatest minds were left trembling in fear. The war, which had begun with arrogance and certainty, had become a nightmare beyond comprehension. They had expected a battle of firepower, of strategy, of military dominance. Instead, they had been faced with something they could not fight, something that did not even consider them a threat. Humanity had not retaliated in the traditional sense. There had been no orbital bombardments, no invasions, no demands for surrender. Instead, they had shattered the very foundation of the Council's reality. Every Council world had felt it. The presence. The unseen force that lingered in the air, watching, listening, reminding them of the mistake they had made. Technology failed at random. Whispers echoed through empty corridors, and shadows seemed to move even where there was no light. Leaders locked themselves away, afraid of what they might see if they stepped outside. Entire populations were gripped by fear, not because of any direct attack, but because of the knowledge that humanity was something else, something they could never understand, something they could never defeat.